Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Have you ever paused to consider a truly counterintuitive idea? What if the very system we believe gives us freedom and, endless progress is actually, maybe subtly, the source of our deepest anxieties and the accumulating problems we see all around us?
That is a provocative thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And today, our mission is to unpack just such an argument. We're taking a close look at Patrick J. Deneen's influential book, Why Liberalism Failed.
That title alone is quite a hook. Deneen makes this bold, almost shocking claim. The mounting catastrophes and dysfunctions we see, they aren't signs that liberalism has failed to live up to its ideals.
Right.
Instead, he argues they are the marks of its profound success. It's a really radical reframing that challenges, our most common assumptions. It reveals what he calls an operating system we might not even realize is running our entire world.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, our source is singular and pretty powerful. A close reading of Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed.
So get ready to maybe reconsider the foundational beliefs that shape our politics, our economics, education, even our personal lives. By the end of this, hopefully, you'll have a unique understanding of our current moment and the forces shaping it.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, Deneen starts by holding up liberalism's original blueprint, this grand vision, right? Liberty, progress through limited government, free markets.
Yeah, the whole package. Individual initiative, political legitimacy through social contract, elections, hallmarks like the rule of law, and independent judiciary. That was the promise.
That was the promise. But the gap between that ideal and our current reality is what Deneen really zeroes in on, isn't it?
Absolutely. He points to things like, a staggering 70% of Americans believing the country is moving in the wrong direction. You see declining public trust in government, deep cynicism towards elites.
Right across the board.
Across the board. Even elections are increasingly seen as rigged by some. And that gap between the wealthy haves and have-nots just keeps growing.
Okay, so if I'm getting this right, Deneen is saying these problems, the declining trust, the inequality, the cynicism, these aren't signs of liberalism failing.
No.
But of it doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's genuinely unsettling to think about. How does he even begin to back that up? It sounds so paradoxical.
It is, and it's a crucial distinction he makes. Deneen portrays liberalism as a kind of invisible operating system.
Okay.
So unlike more obviously ideological regimes like fascism or communism, liberalism sort of pretends to be neutral. It claims it has no intention of shaping individuals or, their souls. It just provides the framework.
Right. It just says, here's the setup, you go choose your life. But Deneen suggests it's constantly subtly shaping everything anyway.
Exactly. It operates largely unseen, much like, say, your computer's operating system. You don't really notice it until it crashes. Right. And he argues its deformations, its problems are now just too obvious to ignore.
He uses that cave analogy too, doesn't he? From Plato.
He does, yeah. Drawing on Socrates in the Republic. We occupy a cave whose walls are like these endless backdrops. They promise new vistas, no constraints, making our actual containment invisible. We think we're free to roam limitlessly.
But we're still within the walls.
Still operating within the predefined walls of the liberal system.
That invisible operating system idea is really grabbing me. Can you help us unpack what Deneen sees as the fundamental code? The underlying assumptions that truly drive this whole thing?
Absolutely. At its core, Deneen argues liberalism is built on two really profound anthropological assumptions, basically. Assumptions about us as humans.
Okay.
Assumptions that subtly redefine what freedom even means. The first, a radical belief in anthropological individualism and what he calls a voluntarist conception of choice.
Voluntarist choice.
Yeah. And the second assumption, a fundamental human separation from, and indeed opposition to, nature itself.
Okay, let's break down that first one. Liberal voluntarism, the rise of the autonomous individual. So this voluntarism, what's Deneen really getting at there?
He means the idea that our choices are completely unfettered, purely our own. Without any prior obligations or inherited ties we didn't explicitly agree to. This concept grounds politics purely on the autonomous choice of individuals.
And he traces this back, right, to thinkers like Hobbes.
He does. Thomas Hobbes described humans in a natural state of radical independence and autonomy. Hobbes suggested we sacrifice many of our natural rights to a sovereign, but it's based purely on consent for security.
Then Locke takes it even further.
John Locke extends that logic, yeah. He says even things like inheritance and marriage become subject to individual consent. Membership in any institution, any group, is constantly monitored based purely on what the individual sees as their own benefit.
Wow, that's a huge shift from older ways of thinking where obligations were often just given, not chosen.
A massive shift. And this idea of unfettered choice, Deneen argues, comes with significant costs. Things like gratitude to the past or obligations to the future, they tend to get replaced by an almost universal pursuit of immediate gratification.
And culture itself changes.
Culture, in this view, becomes about, and this is his phrase, hedonic titillation, visceral crudeness, and distraction.
Hedonic titillation.
That's a mouthful. What does he mean? Practically, like constant entertainment.
Yeah, think the endless scroll of social media, maybe binge-watching streaming shows, the constant chase for the next new thing.
Yep.
It's all designed to keep us superficially stimulated, promoting consumption and detachment, rather than, say, deep engagement or reflection.
You can see this in what Deneen calls superficially self-maximizing, socially destructive behaviors. Things like widespread lawlessness or cheating in schools.
Or hookups, replacing older courtship norms.
Right. It makes you wonder if dating apps are just the ultimate frictionless expression of that exact unfettered choice Deneen's describing.
Precisely. And even stable, lifelong marriage gets viewed increasingly as a kind of limitation on individual freedom. And in economics, the drive for quick profits often trumps long-term investment or stability. Ultimately, Deneen argues, restraint isn't seen as something you cultivate internally, like self-governance or virtue. It becomes the state's job.
It becomes a state's domain, yeah. Something imposed by external law rather than coming from within us or our communities.
Okay, so those are the core assumptions about the individual.
Yeah.
But Deneen says there's a second, equally radical shift in how liberalism views humanity, one that pits us against something even more fundamental, nature itself. How does he trace this war against nature?
Well, if you look back, pre-modern classical and Christian thought generally saw humans as part of a comprehensive natural order. We had a fixed telos.
Telos, like a purpose.
Exactly, a natural end or purpose. Like an acorn's telos is to become an oak tree. Human flourishing, in that older view, came from conforming to your nature and its limits through virtue. It was about fitting in, finding your place within the order.
But liberal philosophy kind of threw that out.
It rejected this idea of self-limitation, yeah. It displaced the idea of the natural order and eventually even the notion of a fixed human nature itself. And this transformation, he says, happened in roughly two waves.
Two waves, okay.
The first wave, starting with figures like Francis Bacon, really emphasized mastering and controlling nature. Using science, using a market economy. Bacon famously said, knowledge is power, right?
Right.
The focus was on relieving the human estate, overcoming limitations. This reversed the old idea of acceptance in favor of, well, limitless human capacity to reshape the world.
And the second wave?
The second wave, kicking off maybe in the 19th century and continuing today, extended this idea of conquering nature to human nature itself.
Ah, so turning the project inward.
Exactly. Viewing human beings as plastic, malleable, capable of sort of infinite moral progress defined by us. We see echoes of this today, he argues, in certain progressive liberal circles, embracing things like biotechnological enhancement of the human body.
And this leads to that paradox you mentioned.
It does, a profound paradox of liberation. Our technologies, like smartphones, are designed to free us from limits of place, time, identity. But Deneen suggests they actually change the structure of our minds, turning us into different creatures, often without us even realizing or consenting.
It's fascinating. The same tech that promises connection can make us lonelier.
Right. And as devices increasingly replace humans in the workplace, we're granted a kind of freedom, maybe freedom from toil, but we become sort of servants to our own creations. We keep thinking more science and tech can fix the problems created by science and tech.
It's a cycle.
And if modern science and technology really are a war against nature, as Deneen puts it, then, well, it appears that we are losing.
You just have to look around, right? Climate change, resource depletion,
groundwater contamination, species extinction. Our carbon-saturated world, he says, is the hangover of a 150-year party where we thought we were free from nature's constraints.
Okay, so if these are the hidden rules, the assumptions. Deneen then shows how this operating system fundamentally reshapes something as basic as culture, creating what he controversially calls an anti-culture. What does he mean by that?
It sounds harsh, anti-culture. He means it's not just a lack of culture, but an active force that systematically dismantles the deep local traditions and shared meanings that historically bound communities together.
So what we usually call culture, like pop culture, media culture, even multiculturalism.
He says that's actually a sign of culture's evisceration. It's replaced by this pervasive anti-culture, a kind of standardized universal market culture that smooths over and ultimately destroys truly local-rooted cultures.
How does it do that?
Well, this anti-culture frees us from obligations to specific people and relationships. It replaces custom and tradition with abstract, depersonalized law. Personal obligations get swapped out for, legal threats or just generalized financial debt. Everything becomes transactional.
And this anti-culture also disconnects us from time. He calls it presentism.
Yeah, exactly. Liberal social contract theory, by focusing on individuals making choices now, created a kind of historyless and timeless condition. It reduces humans to these autonomous choosing agents living in an eternal present.
Didn't Tocqueville notice something like this way back?
He did. Alexis de Tocqueville, observing American democracy in the 19th century, saw this tendency towards presentism. He worried that liberal democracy makes people forget their ancestors and clouds their view of their descendants.
Isolating them
In the solitude of their own heart, as he put it. And he warned this leads to a kind of brutish indifference about the future and just an insatiable desire to satisfy immediate cravings. Now.
And this time fracturing, Deneen argues, feeds into economic indifference too, separating the successful from the less fortunate.
Right, with little sense of shared fate or long-term responsibility binding them together.
And it does something similar with place, creating what Deneen calls homelessness. Not literal homelessness necessarily, but...
Right, a kind of spiritual or cultural homelessness. Liberalism valorizes placelessness. It posits abstract individuals living in abstract places. The fundamental liberal right, arguably, is the right to leave your birthplace, to not be tied down.
Which sounds like freedom, but...
But critics like Wendell Berry, who writes a lot about these deracinating effects, these forces that uproot us, emphasize that real community is a rich and varied set of personal relationships, and it's intrinsically tied to a place and a time.
You can't just manufacture community anywhere.
No. True community, Berry argues, demands things like trust, goodwill, forbearance, self-restraint, compassion, and forgiveness, things that grow over time in a place.
So how does liberalism interact with existing cultures then? Deneen uses that striking image, the brood parasite.
Yeah, like the brown-headed cowbird. It lays its eggs in other birds' nests, right? And its chick pushes out the original eggs. Deneen argues liberalism does something similar. It infiltrates existing cultures. It doesn't always destroy them outright, but it subtly replaces authentic local traditions with a standardized, market-friendly version. Think multiculturalism, sometimes meaning a collection of restaurants rather than deep cultural practices.
So it looks like diversity on the surface.
But underneath, it can be a kind of homogeneous, market-tested celebration of difference that leads to apathy, what he calls indifferentism. It smooths out the rough edges that actually define distinct cultures.
Okay, so this anti-culture then shapes how we approach really fundamental things like education and citizenship. Deneen argues liberalism fundamentally undermines liberal education, the actual liberal arts.
How so?
By replacing the old idea of learning to be free with the assumption that we are born free. If you're already free, why do you need education to cultivate freedom?
Ah, I see. So education's purpose shifts.
It shifts dramatically. It becomes what he calls servile education. Education becomes just an instrument for personal liberation in the sense of satisfying your untutored appetite and achieving technical mastery.
So subjects like STEM, economics, business, they become the main focus.
They become seen as the sole justified subjects, yeah.
Yep.
They replace the arts of the private person, things that cultivate judgment, virtue, understanding, with training for a job, essentially, training for the market.
He points to the 2008 economic crisis, doesn't he? As an example.
He does. A crisis driven by unlimited consumption and living beyond our means, largely precipitated, he notes, by graduates of elite institutions. Yet these same institutions rarely acknowledge their own potential culpability for fostering what Deneen calls moral obesity among their students. It's like they taught them how to be brilliant at optimizing systems.
But not restraint, or maybe a sense of the common good.
Exactly, and this degradation extends from education to citizenship itself. Deneen argues that liberalism, while it legitimizes itself through consent and elections, actually puts structures in place that dissipate real democratic energies.
How does it do that?
It ensures governance remains largely in the hands of select elites. He actually calls it anti-democratic liberalism.
That sounds like a contradiction.
It does. But he reminds us that the ancient suspicion of pure democracy is largely forgotten today. The U.S. Constitution, for instance, was designed not as a direct democracy, but as a republic, deliberately minimizing direct electoral influence in many ways.
Right. The founders were worried about mob rule, factions.
Precisely. James Madison emphasized that government exists primarily to protect the diversity and the faculties of men, which largely meant protecting private pursuits, especially property, and to channel self-interest constructively.
And the idea of a large republic, the enlarged orbit, as they called it.
Madison and Hamilton explicitly thought a large-scale political entity would actually discourage deep political trust and local activity. It would lead citizens to focus more on their private lives, their private aims.
So bigness itself was seen as a way to dilute passionate politics.
In a way, yes. They believed that better administration at the federal level would eventually destroy people's natural fidelity to their local communities, redirecting allegiance towards the central government.
And the modern outcome, according to Deneen,
Is a society that actively fosters self-interest, prioritizes private pursuits over the public good, and creates a kind of psychic distance between people. We're short of our civic power through voting, maybe.
but we feel politically weak.
Exactly. We engage in infinite choices in the market, in our private lives. But these choices, he suggests, might just be deeper expressions of a kind of thraldom to the system itself.
So in this fragmented, self-interested society, who ends up actually running things? Who forms this elite Deneen talks about?
Well, ironically, this whole system leads to what he identifies as a new aristocracy, liberalism, which justified itself as fighting the old aristocracy of birth.
Has created a new one.
It has created a new one, yeah.
Right.
Based on being, in Locke's terms, the industrious and rational. But practically speaking, it's based on position, income, and geographic location. Meritocracy, maybe, but one that calcifies.
And he calls this the secession of the successful.
Right. This new elite, often highly educated, tends to benefit from stable families, strong social institutions, which they can sometimes maintain through purchase support, nannies, tutors, private schools.
While those in lower socioeconomic tiers experience
Much higher levels of, as he puts it, catastrophic levels of familial and social breakdown. The success of the few seems linked to the instability of the many.
But hang on, what about the big political fights we see between conservatives and progressives? Doesn't that contradict the idea of a single elite?
That's a great question. Deneen argues this great debate actually masks a deeper cooperation.
How so?
Both sides, despite disagreeing on the means or the pace, ultimately advance the core liberal project. The liberation of the individual from unchosen bonds, and the expansion of the state and the market to manage the consequences.
So one side emphasizes individual economic freedom, the other individual social or cultural freedom, but both expand the sphere of individual choice managed by abstract systems.
That's basically his argument. He points to someone like John Stuart Mill, whose famous essay On Liberty sought to liberate persons of genius from the constraints of custom and public opinion. Mill wanted a society of experiments and living, largely for the benefit of this small minority.
And the counter-argument
Comes from thinkers like Edmund Burke, who valued prejudice, meaning customs, traditions, ingrained habits, as essential for virtue and for shaping a decent society for the many ordinary people, not just the exceptional few.
So Deneen's conclusion is that our society is now basically organized for the benefit of Mill's few strong rather than Burke's many ordinary.
That seems to be the core of it. Which brings us to his final assessment. Liberalism's current path is simply unsustainable.
Why unsustainable?
Because this titanic wager, the bet that we could lift ancient norms, conquer nature, all for infinite individual choices, is culminating, he says, in the depletion of both our moral resources, like self-command, and our material resources.
The system requires things it simultaneously destroys.
Pretty much. It can't endlessly enforce order on radically autonomous individuals without becoming ever more coercive, nor can it provide infinite material growth in a finite world. The logic eats itself.
And the noble lie that holds it together, the idea that problems like discontent, inequality, dysfunction are just isolated bugs, not features.
That lie is shattering, he argues. The system's defenders, especially those who benefit most, might cling to it. But for many others, the disconnect between the promise and the reality is just too stark now.
Okay, so if the system is unsustainable, what's the alternative? Is Deneen calling for, like, a revolution? Tearing it all down?
Not exactly. He's careful not to call for some grand revolution or a complete undoing of everything liberalism achieved. He acknowledges its genuine contributions advancing ideals of liberty, dignity, justice.
Right.
But he argues it fundamentally disfigured these ideals through that false anthropology we talked about, that flawed understanding of human nature based on radical individualism and opposition to nature.
So if not revolution, what does a path forward look like according to him?
He proposes something much smaller scale, more bottom-up. Not grand theories, but small local forms of resistance. He emphasizes practices more than theories.
Practices aimed at what?
Aimed at building resilient new cultures against the anti-culture of liberalism. Countercultures, essentially, but rooted and constructive. And what do these practices look like?
Well, first, cultivating new cultures. Cultures grounded in actual local places, embedded in time, drawing from the inheritance of family, neighbors, community. Things like local music, art, storytelling, shared food traditions, real stuff, not just market trends.
Okay, culture. What else?
Second, prioritizing what he calls household economics. This means consciously fostering the ability to do and make things for oneself and one's family, building, fixing, cooking, gardening.
Practical skills.
Practical skills, yeah.
Oh.
For mindless consumption and waste. It's about cultivating a degree of independence from the totalizing modern market.
Makes sense.
Third, promoting local exchange. Economic transactions that are built more on relationships, tied to places and histories, fostering genuine community and a long-term view rather than just abstract, depersonalized market interactions with strangers.
Getting back to knowing who you're trading with.
Something like that. And finally, a renewed emphasis on political self-governance, meaning minimizing the obsession with national politics, which often leaves people feeling powerless anyway, and returning focus to local self-rule. Getting involved in your town, your school board, what Tocqueville called the schoolhouse of democracy. That, Deneen suggests, is where true liberty, understood as self-governance, is actually learned and practiced.
So, quite a journey through Deneen's critique. We've really explored his argument that our current societal crises aren't, accidental glitches,
Right.
but stem directly from liberalism's fundamental assumptions about human nature and its relentless pursuit of a particular, maybe even distorted kind of freedom.
It really turns conventional wisdom on its head. So the provocative thought to leave you, our listener, with is this. What does this all mean for you? If liberalism, as Deneen suggests, has maybe made us independent and weak, as he puts it, and its ultimate success leads paradoxically to a subtle form of bondage, how might you begin to cultivate real liberty?
The liberty he defines as self-governance.
Exactly, the self-governance of both your own desires and your immediate communities. How do you do that in a world that constantly pushes for endless, often isolating, but maybe ultimately unfulfilling choice? Something to think about.